Hi, and welcome back to the Nook. Thanks for joining me here today. I'm Nat. In case you don't know, I make videos on a number of things, mostly books, but I've been doing a few, commentary videos or video essays on stuff, ideas surrounding work, surrounding the world we live in, about the climate and the environment, and any sort of topic that relates to all those things I've mentioned. So yes, today will be another one of those video essays or commentary type essays or videos or things like that. I mean, this is a whole general category of things. And I'm not gonna make a really coherent, really professional looking video today. It's just gonna be like all my other videos where I sit down and talk through some of the ideas that I've been thinking about, reflecting on, wanting to share them with everyone, and hoping to, get people thinking or encourage some kind of discussion in the comments about whatever I've discussed. Now, today's video is going to be about work, and this topic of work has been everywhere. It has been becoming a lot more popular of a topic online. And I want to say online because it's always a very good practice to be aware that whatever discussions happen online, it's not always the same as all the discussions that are happening in person in wherever you are. I mean, it could be in your workplace or with your family and friends. Oftentimes, whatever discussions we have online have some semblance to reality, but for a lot of people, these conversations only happen online, or they only happen in digital spaces. So when I see a lot of these conversations happening about work online, I kind of see them happening somewhat in real life as well, but the sentiments are oftentimes a lot more exaggerated online. So I'm not gonna be making a claim that now it's time to overthrow the concept of work, or it's time to really revolutionize the idea of work. But these are really good signs that we are now progressing towards a bigger conversation about work, and it's no longer something that only political scientists or economists can talk about. It's something that everyone can talk about, and I think that's one takeaway that we can get from all this online discussion.
The number you have dialed has been changed.
I want to start with an overview of what we've been seeing online. So, if you're a returning subscriber, you would know that I've talked about this before, this trend of I don't dream of labor, which was hitting its peak around about 3 or 4 months ago, with a lot of people making videos on YouTube and on TikTok about how they don't dream about labor, how they don't want to have a dream job, how they don't live to work. And nowadays you see a huge trend in this anti-work sentiment that is going way beyond, I guess, just content creating. So you see a Reddit thread, anti-work Reddit thread, that has been gaining a lot of followers lately. You also see a lot of news being written about different young generations across countries who are adopting a more of a work less, live more mentality. So one very prime example is the lying flat phenomenon that a lot of people are talking about in China, which has been kind of heavily criticized by conventional media and by the state and all that. But you also see this in a lot of other countries. I don't think this is something that is only happening in America, because I know that a lot of the discussions in anti-work heavily center around global north countries. It really centers the American experience a lot. But I want to add to that and say that this is something that is happening on a much more global scale, where I think a lot of young people across the board, especially across different cultures, are understanding that this really working hard mentality to get success is not really working out for them. And this is also inspired, or I guess a lot of it is being influenced by many different strands of thought. There is no one original kind of thinker that has contributed to these ideas of thought. There are many distinct and separate thinkers that have contributed to these ideas of anti-work. So now that we've talked about that kind of context in contemporary times, I want to talk a little bit more about the history of anti-work. Now, as I mentioned before, anti-work is not a new sentiment. people for ages have been talking about the pros and cons of work. And here I want to make a distinction between work, as in just labor, and formal employment. So work is a very broad category, and oftentimes when we think of work, we conflate the act of producing something with the act of having gainful employment. But oftentimes the idea of gainful employment is a much more recent thing. It's not something that has been, ingrained in us from a long time back. Humans have always been working. Humans have always had this relationship with laboring and having output, and work itself just connotes activities or some kind of effort being put in to produce some kind of tangible thing or intangible value to oneself or to other people, and that is work. However, in today's context, work often refers to employment, often refers to some kind of formal agreement between the employer and the employee, where the employee is giving a portion of their skills, their time, their energy to produce things for the employer, which the employer then kind of converts into something that's a bit more like productive assets, and trying to get returns on that, and trying to increase profits and to increase maximum efficiency and things like that. So in today's context, work often takes the form of a salaried kind of formal contract, and that is what we're contesting today in this video. The idea of work as a central means through which most of us gain our income, most of us gain our social standing, most of us gain our sense of value and worth, but it is also the major form in which we are sort of boxed into this concept of what we call consumer workers, or worker consumers. And so work in that context is what puts us in that position, rather than just the labor itself, which is just producing things, but rather it is the formal contract or the formalized way of producing work that a lot of people are pushing back against nowadays. So if you're like me and you're wondering, how do we get here? How do we get to a point where now people are questioning the very nature of work? What exactly is the nature of work? How has it come to this point? Now, this is a whole historical thing. It's a whole historical inquiry, and you're more than welcome to check out some of the resources I have below to further your understanding of work as this concept. But very briefly, there are a couple of influences that have shaped what we know as this working hard ethic today. So like I mentioned before, work has always been there, but it's always to the extent of how much it has dominated our lives. And some people have attributed this kind of obsession with work to several different strands of thought. One could be the Protestant ethic, which is this kind of Christian mindset. I think early forms of Christian mindsets that equates working hard to being virtuous. I guess in other cultures as well, I think especially in sort of the East Asian lineage of thinkers, there's also a lot of Confucian ideals that's associated with working hard or sacrificing one's own kind of pleasures for the gains of the collective. And so there are many different past thinkers that have contributed to this idea of working hard as a form of value, as a form of ethics, as a form of morality, and that has been credited as a way of influencing the way we think about work today. I would say it goes far beyond that. I would say that what has really transformed work into just a virtuous working hard thing, into something that really dominates our entire mindset or way of thinking, is really consumerism. And I guess the bigger underlying reason here would be capitalism. But I'm not here to be, this is not like an anti-capitalist video, although it definitely has some anti-capitalist sentiments, but this is an anti-work video. So let's talk about consumerism. I'll be referring to this book a lot, called The Refusal of Work by David Frayne. And in this book, Frayne puts forth many different ideas about work. And what is really well done in this book is covering the different aspects of work today. So not just the history of work, but what work stands for us and how we might actually try to overcome or resist it. So one thing that I felt was really a prominent idea that I came across in this book is the idea of a worker consumer. And this is the idea that in today's current state of work, we are always kept in this perpetual cycle of working and consuming. And I would say this is a major reason why so much of our value is being attributed to our identity as a worker. Because our identity of a worker sort of determines how much we can consume. It determines what kind of identity we can create for ourselves as a consumer, and that is very much dictated by what kind of work you do, and that kind of becomes this never-ending cycle that you hope will eventually cycle upwards in this kind of upward mobility trend. But we find most of us in this perpetual cycle, just over and over again, repeating things, hoping that either our consumer habits will bring us up a notch, or that our working lifestyles will bring us one notch above. But in the end, all these things cancel out, and we're always kept in this state of working and consuming. And through that, I think that's why we start to create a lot of values around the idea of work. Work doesn't just become the act of producing something tangible that is valuable, but it becomes something that dictates your morality beyond just a virtue, but dictates your sign of weakness or your sign of character. It dictates your personality. It also dictates the kind of responsibilities that you are kind of given. It dictates the kind of maturity that you can attain, and all these things kind of tie back to your worker identity. That's why I think it's particularly difficult to get out of this cycle, because so much of our lives today are written around this narrative of either being a worker or a consumer. There's almost no other way to opt out of it. I mean, even your unemployed time is only seen ever as a transitionary thing or a temporary thing. There's no way that someone can be seen as unemployed for an indeterminate amount of time. What keeps us in this worker-consumer cycle is really this pursuit of increasing growth, because in order to have increasing growth and in order to have increasing profits, what you gotta have is increasing efficiency, but also increasing consumption, and that all of that will increase in this amount of profits that just keeps growing every single year. So there is a huge incentive to keep us in this worker consumer cycle, because that is like the perfect formula for kind of squeezing out as much money from the everyday people. If you think about it, getting people to work so hard for very minimal income and getting people to spend as much as possible on their minimal income is really the best way you can get skyrocketing amounts of profits every single year, which translates into good GDP, which then translates apparently into greater prosperity for all. But we all know that's kind of not how it works. Just a side note from post-editing net here, this is also the reason why most of us are kept within this system, because so many of our basic needs have been commodified to the extent that we have to keep within the system in order to secure those things. So things like our healthcare or even access to healthy food often is gate kept by also how much you can consume and how much you can afford to pay for these things. And therefore, employment becomes sort of the most straightforward and sometimes the only way we can access these things. So that's why it's really, really difficult for us to opt out when so much of our basic needs are kept within this system. So that's kind of the state that we're in right now, and let's just talk a little bit more about why people are starting to feel very disenchanted with the idea of work. Because shouldn't it be kind of fulfilling somehow? People have been telling us that when you work this hard, you should feel fulfilled. When you consume this much, it should give you satisfaction. That's the narrative that we've been given, that you work really hard so you can afford all these nice things that you can get for yourself and your family, and that should actually give you a very happy life. It should give you a very contented life. But now that formula doesn't work anymore, because there's two sides to it, the worker side and the consumer side. On the worker side, we start to see more and more people getting exploited for their labor. We see incomes not increasing, they're kind of stagnating. We're also investing a lot of additional labor into our work. So emotional labor is one of those things where now you're expected in your job to perform a kind of pleasant personality. You're expected to have fun at your work. You're not even just expected to work, but you're expected to enjoy your work. For a lot of people who do physical labor as well, or kind of service jobs, things are not looking up so great. I mean, worker benefits are decreasing, unions are not forming, and generally the cost of living is just higher and higher every single year. So as a worker, already your work is not really the best place anymore. It's getting less and less stable, but it's also demanding more and more out of you, and it's becoming very unequal in terms of power dynamics between the employee and the employer. So that's just one part of the formula. And now when we look at the consumer side of the formula, it's also kind of breaking down pretty fast. People are now realizing the environmental consequences of their consumer habits. People are also recognizing that material gains and material wealth has brought them more anxiety and more dissatisfaction than the actual non-economic stuff, which is just like time with family or time in nature and just general self-development. People are now realizing that you cannot pursue these things with money alone, and that their work is sort of preventing them from pursuing all these things. And what we need to pursue all these genuine markers of well-being is time, which then is taken away from us from work. So on the consumer side, you already realize that there are a lot of things that are breaking down. With the work from home situation, people are now realizing that spending more time with their family and friends, having more free time, more autonomy over their time, has given them a lot more pleasure, a lot more sense of selfness, a lot more sense of like self-autonomy, than going to the office every single day. And that, consuming more, which is consuming more not just to upkeep with their lifestyle, but also to buy convenience, realizing that they can do away with all of that has also brought upon a greater kind of awareness that what we need is more time and not more money, and therefore not more material stuff, but actually just more time for ourselves. So now we realize that the formula on both ends, they're both not really working out, which is why I think there are more and more people who are starting to be a lot more accepting of this anti-work sentiment. I kind of feel like just about a year ago, 2 years ago, if you start to critique work, or you start to kind of say that, people shouldn't be working so hard, people would start to just criticize you as being lazy, or people would say that you're too privileged, that, you can afford not to work. More and more people are realizing that we need more discussions on work, and we need to equalize this discussion of work. It's not something that you could just earn a lot of money and just retire early. I think the FIRE movement, which is the kind of work really hard, really young, and save up for your retirement to have an early retirement, I see a lot of people trying to do that, and this is really reserved for the few that can work very high-paying jobs and can afford to retire in relative luxury. You know that meme that's about like what's trashy when you're poor but kind of like fashionable when you're rich, and leisure is one of them. Definitely everyone has the right to free time to develop themselves, no matter what kind of work, what kind of background they come from. Everyone has the right to autonomy and to leisure and to spend time with their friends and family. I don't think this is something that should be gate-kept by the rich. Basically all the rich people are already doing this. They're not doing anything that's economically productive. They're not doing anything with their labor. They're just moving money around and getting more profits that way. So I don't really know why we are not demanding leisure for the working class, or why we're not demanding more time for ourselves, to enjoy ourselves, to discover what we like and discover what kinds of things we can create, or just to be ourselves. We don't even have to be productive, because people will always want to do things. If you realize during the lockdown, people were productive, I guess not in a work sense, but people were doing things. People were knitting, they were baking, they were picking up new skills. People, when given the time, will start to do things. I mean, that's kind of like the magic of humanity, right? That's kind of why we're here in the first place, because humans will always want to create stuff. People will always want to find community and to find ways to help one another. So I don't think we should all be worried about having a society of lazy people, because for me, I thought I was lazy, but when I look back in the past year, when I had a really unpredictable work schedule, I was still doing things. I was still making content. I was still trying to read books. I was still trying to, improve my dance. I was doing a lot of things, and I couldn't help but feel that I was lazy. I couldn't help but feel that I was being unproductive. I couldn't help but feel that I was someone that just couldn't get a job or just couldn't do actual work. And I know in people's eyes I am someone who is just unemployed, even though I am still earning money. I am actually working for myself, and I'm finding different ways of earning an income, but officially people would see me as unemployed, or people would see me as someone who is not living up to my full potential, who is not choosing to grow up, who is just living in a very transitionary stage. And that is kind of the reality of unemployment, or the reality of work, where the only proper work you can have is a kind of valid contract you have with an employer that gives you a fixed salary every month. No matter how hard you work, no matter how productive you are, your salary is a fixed amount of money that you get every single month. At this juncture, I just want to acknowledge that I've seen a lot of conversations online about work, talking about how people who can afford not to work are privileged, and that they are people who are advocating for a very impractical way of earning money. So I know that some people are saying that, all these content creators are talking about not wanting to work, and encouraging everyone to be content creators. And the reality is that it's really hard to make money off content creation. It's not easy, and I am not here advocating for everyone to be a content creator and to escape their work through content creating or through social media, because that is still work, that you're still working in the advertising industry, basically. And I want to acknowledge that there are different anxieties that come with joblessness. So you are exchanging a general anxiety about the meaning of life with financial anxiety. And this is something I felt when I was at work. Doing my full-time job. I felt completely useless. I just felt completely useless. I was just someone there existing in my physical body, but I was not doing any actual meaningful work, or at least I didn't feel like I was, and I felt completely wasted. I just felt like every day was just a place, like it was just a day that I felt was just being wasted. And I had all these amazing ideas I wanted to do. I wanted to encourage people to read. I wanted to kind of encourage a lot of different discussions. I wanted to do a lot of things. I wanted to do creative things. I wanted to learn different skills. But because I had to spend so much of my time at work, I couldn't do those things. And it was an open office concept, so people could see what you're up to. So I was just staring at a screen the whole day without doing much. And I exchanged that anxiety of being alienated from my work and alienated from my sense of self. I exchanged that anxiety with an anxiety of money, and I exchanged it with an anxiety of self-worth, because now I am worried that I'm not making enough money. I'm also worried that people are not gonna see me as a legitimate person because I am not working in a formal sense, and I'm also generally anxious about my sense of potential, I guess, or the sense of the value of the work that I'm producing, even though I know I enjoy it, even though I know that this is something that brings me a lot of joy, and also I feel is meaningful in exchange with other people. But I'm always worried about whether I am actually being unrealistic, if I'm being sort of in the clouds, if I'm being sort of too narcissistic in trying to do things my own way, being too selfish and all that. So I'm just swapping one anxiety for the other. But if you ask me which anxiety I would choose, I guess I would choose what I'm doing right now. This anxiety is slightly more tolerable than the first anxiety that I experienced at my job. So what do we do now? We're in a society where our value as a person is being dictated by our employability and our ability to consume as well. We are still kind of dictated by this worker-consumer cycle, to the point where everything kind of revolves around that. Whatever you do after work is a way to also upkeep who you are at work. A lot of people know this, that when you start working a certain kind of job, there are hidden costs that you have to give up in order to keep up with that work. It could be transport cost, it could be convenience cost because you had to buy your lunch there, or you had to buy extra services, things like maybe you have to get someone to clean your house once a week because you have no time to clean your house, and I was there before. I felt like I was so beaten by the long hours at work that everything else was just spent, and it's so easy to get into that mindset. I know how it feels like. It's just like, okay, I've earned a paycheck, I can spend this amount of money to just make me feel a bit better about the paycheck and about my work, and it just happens over and over again. And it's completely normal, it's completely valid. That's how it works. That's literally how the system works. It pays you a certain amount, keeps you in a place for a certain amount of time in order to make you feel like you have to spend in a particular way. And all these things kind of take you away from activities that are actually more valuable or more meaningful, but they're not economically productive. Things like taking a walk in the park, meeting your friend outside, maybe not even for a cup of coffee, but just meeting up with your friends, doing all sorts of things. Fixing your stuff, that's one thing that is really not economically productive, is fixing and repairing your own things. That's definitely anti-capitalist if you're wanting to do that. Unfortunately, there is no coherent anti-work political stance that you can take. And I guess that is the good thing about anti-work, is that it should be something that unites people across backgrounds and across classes. And it's something that you can still stand in solidarity with, even if you have a fantastic job, even if you love your life right now. There are plenty of people who are not in the best place with regards to their work and with regards to their spending, having to be in debt and things like that. And this is something I find that's really quite an opportunity for us to all come in and discuss. What is the meaning of work? What should work look like? And should we be afraid of mass unemployment? Why is it that employment is the only way that we can secure a good life? Why is it the only way that we can determine someone's value or someone's worth in society? And this is necessarily exclusive, because if you measure people by how economically productive they can be in terms of both working and consuming, you are missing a lot of people in the equation. You are missing people who cannot work for multiple reasons. You're also missing out on a lot of activities that are inherently good but are not captured in the economy. Things like caregiving, things like community building, things like repairing or like restoring nature. All these things are not accounted for in the way that we talk about economics. They're not things that we consider as traditional work, but these are all necessary things that we rely on in order to keep on living, in order to keep on doing the things that we love, and to keep on being ourselves. And we all know that when people are, in control of their own lives, and when people feel a lot more secure, we know that that's the prime equation or the prime state to be in. If you want people to be happy and you want humanity to progress, then it's in everyone's interest that we critique and we redefine what work is to us, that we can reclaim the idea of work as something that is good for us, and not just good for the economy, but good for ourselves and our families and our societies. That is something that we can take our pride in, not because we want to consume more, but because the work itself brings joy and brings value to people, regardless of whether it brings money or not. Because everyone knows that in this age we have abundance. It is not that we have scarcity. Every day there are tons of food that's being thrown out from groceries. We have tons of crops and tons of harvest that is going to waste. We have a lot of food, we have a lot of clothes, we have a lot of everything. They're just not evenly distributed, and we have enough for everyone to live a good life, but we're just not doing it. So I do think that it's a very great starting point now. If you're watching this video and you think about work, let's just all think about it. Let's just all start with taking a step back and asking ourselves, What is work to me? Am I okay with where I'm at? Are there ways that I can try to remove myself from this work-centric mindset? Can I place more emphasis on other things in my life? I am going to be leaving some resources and links down below for you to check out. And for those who are in a pretty good position where, like, you enjoy your job and you're earning quite a good income and you're figuring out how can I better the situation for a lot of other people, there is this video called The Socialist Guide to Surviving in Capitalism, and it's about how doing well is not treason, and it's not about taking opportunities away from people, but trying to change the system as much for people to also thrive in. And I guess this is something that I also struggle with, the idea of actually doing well in a system. And the fact is that all of us want to do well in the system, all of us want to have a good life, and there's no need to bash people for being successful in the way that they are. What we should be doing is to kind of all come together and figure out a more fair system for everyone, and that we can try to accept and embrace different forms of success for everyone. Just because some people might want to achieve financial freedom and want to achieve, I guess, like financial wealth, it shouldn't mean that everyone should try to attain financial wealth. It should mean that our definitions of happiness and success should be diverse enough that allows for everyone to figure out what they want and to find their own way of thriving and their own way of using their talents for the good of everyone. There's like no true coherent argument in my video. As always, in all my videos I tend to just ramble, but I do hope there are some points that make sense to you, and that it kind of helps to spark some questions about the state of work that you're in, or the kind of society that we live in today. I feel like all these things are really interconnected, and hopefully I want to make a video on degrowth soon, and about economics, which is kind of scary for me because economics is a really scary thing for me to talk about, but we should all demystify economics. So let's try to do that next time. But until then, I hope you'll stay well. I hope you've been doing all right, and that you get to have a better day ahead of you. Now for my content, I know I haven't been the most consistent in uploading. I've been uploading about 2 videos a month now, but I am determined to bring that number up a little bit more in the next 2 months. So we'll see, and I'm always very happy and very grateful to have this opportunity to talk to everyone. So thank you so much for watching my video, and thank you so much for staying all the way if you did. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for always supporting me in my endeavors and always supporting my videos, and I hope to come back to you all soon with another one, and hopefully more conversations and more insights for everyone to share and for everyone to think about. So thank you so much for being here. You're great. Yeah, thanks, and I'll see you soon. Bye.